There are only two currencies that truly matter in a war for inheritance: information and patience. My cousins, Liam and Amanda, believed they had a monopoly on both when they stood before the judge, brandishing a forged birth certificate. Their argument was simple: that I, Eleanor Hayes, was not my father's legitimate daughter. What they failed to realize was that for exactly 7 years, 4 months, and 18 days, I had been compiling a dossier on them. My quiet war began the moment I first heard Amanda's voice slice through the heavy oak door of the library. "When Uncle Arthur dies, that bastard will not see a dime." I had been reaching for a book on the shelf in our family's Gilded Age mansion when her words froze me. My heart hammered against my ribs, my hand suspended in midair. Bastard? Was that how they truly saw me? That single moment became a poisonous gem I would turn over and over in my mind during sleepless nights in my Greenwich Village apartment. Armed with a law degree from Columbia, a master's in corporate law, and a fellowship at Harvard my father insisted upon. You have to be twice as sharp, Eleanor, twice as prepared. I possessed all the necessary tools to dissect their scheme. Liam and Amanda, the children of my father's deceased brother, were the true Hayeses. I, on the other hand, was the daughter of the former secretary who had supposedly trapped the billionaire. It made no difference that my parents' marriage was genuine. In the cruel calculus of New York's old money dynasties, my bloodline would always be considered tainted by the wrong class. The conspiracy itself wasn't a shock, but its timing was. My father was still very much alive, playing tennis 3 times a week at the country club and ruling his real estate empire with an iron fist. In that chilling moment of clarity, I saw 2 paths before me: immediate confrontation or strategic observation. I chose the art of silence. That very evening, I purchased my first piece of recording equipment, small, discreet, and utterly undetectable. It marked my transformation from a respected corporate lawyer into a spy within my own family, meticulously cataloging every crime, every incriminating whisper, every questionable move my beloved cousins made. Have you ever wondered how far you'd go to prove you belong? I decided I would go to the very end, even if it meant becoming as cold and calculating as the people I despised. I grew up a ghost in my own home, haunting the cold corridors of the Hayes mansion on the Upper East Side, the kind of neoclassical fortress tourists snap photos of through ornate iron gates, oblivious to the generations of elegant deceptions that festered behind its flawless facade. My bedroom was situated in the East Wing, a deliberate architectural reminder of my place in the family hierarchy, far from the main suites. "Teresa's girl," the aunts would whisper during Sunday brunches, their voices dripping with condescension as I focused intently on the family crest embossed on the porcelain plate before me. My mother was killed in a car accident when I was 22. I sometimes wonder if she too was a casualty of their intricate web of intrigue, or if it was merely a cruel twist of fate that stole her from me when I needed an ally the most. My father, Arthur, had his own way of compensating for the family's prejudice. "Consider this your only head start," he told me on my 17th birthday. "The rest, you earn." To an outsider, it might have sounded harsh, but I understood it as his own twisted method of arming me for the battles ahead. I studied like a death row inmate seeking a pardon, valedictorian at my prep school, a full scholarship to Columbia Law, graduating with top honors. Meanwhile, my cousins coasted through expensive private universities, retaking semesters and squandering fortunes on trips to St. Bart's and Aspen. "Hayes blood doesn't require effort," their mother, my Aunt Elisa, would say, another of her backhanded compliments. She had no idea that I was pocketing every single slight, turning her disdain into fuel for my silent resolve. Upon my return from Harvard, my father appointed me to the family's conglomerate. It wasn't the token position my cousins had anticipated, but the role of chief legal officer. I saw the raw shock in Liam's eyes during the announcement, the flicker of contempt at the corner of Amanda's mouth. "Congratulations, cousin," they chimed in unison, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes as they raised their champagne flutes in a hollow toast. It was then I knew that being competent wasn't enough. I had to be invincible. I strategically set up my office on the same floor as theirs, where the walls were just thin enough to pick up stray conversations, and the location was perfect for observing their comings and goings. I became both a shadow and a mirror, reflecting the exact image they expected to see. The dedicated, slightly naive cousin, forever grateful for the opportunity. Who would ever suspect that behind the polite smiles and flawless legal briefs, I was building a fortress of evidence, brick by painstaking brick? The first significant piece of my collection fell into place 6 months later. Liam, serving as CFO through sheer nepotism, siphoned $2.3 million to an account in the Cayman Islands during a tense negotiation with a Singaporean sovereign wealth fund. It was instinct, perhaps, that led me to spot the inconsistencies in the quarterly reports that crossed my desk. Instead of sounding the alarm, I had a keylogger discreetly installed on his computer. Every email, every wire transfer, every incriminating message was automatically archived to a private server I maintained under a pseudonym. "Our friend has made the deposit. We can proceed," he typed to a contact identified only as MP. I printed it, dated it, and locked it away in a safe at my secret Soho loft, an industrial space I rented solely to house my growing arsenal of their sins. Amanda was not to be outdone in their race to self-destruction. I caught her leaking privileged information about an upcoming acquisition by Hayes Properties to our fiercest competitor, Vanguard Developments. The leak resulted in us losing a highly coveted piece of land in the Hamptons that my father had been pursuing for years. When the news broke, she played the part of the devastated innocent to perfection, even managing to produce tears during the emergency board meeting. "Someone must have betrayed us, Uncle. We have to launch a full investigation," she declared. I watched, captivated by her performance, all while my brooch, a graduation gift from my father, discreetly recorded every word, its purpose ironically twisted into a tool for my counter-espionage. That night, I christened my growing collection of secrets Project Nightingale. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about cosmic balance, a meticulous restoration of order. It was the quiet, unshakable belief that in the end, the universe always settles its debts. The first tremor in our family's gilded cage came when my father suffered a massive stroke at the age of 70. Before the doctors had even stabilized him, I found my cousins ransacking his private study in the mansion, their greed a palpable entity in the room as they desperately searched for his will, bank statements, and powers of attorney. The gilded frames of the oil paintings, however, were now watching them. I had retrofitted them with Israeli micro-cameras, an exorbitant purchase funded by the bonus from my last corporate victory. All night, I monitored their frantic search from my laptop, watching their growing desperation morph into whispered, venomous arguments. "He can't change the will now," Amanda insisted, her voice a hiss. "We have to make sure everything stays as it is." What a waste of their energy. 2 years prior, I had already persuaded my father to update his estate plan, cementing my position as his primary heir. A trusted private nurse was already stationed at the hospital, under strict instructions to call me the second either of them tried to get my father to sign a single piece of paper. The silent war was escalating, but I was already several moves ahead. My mother used to quote Sun Tzu, but I prefer a more modern mantra. The best time to win a battle is before your opponent even knows they're on the battlefield. If you truly want to understand the machinery of New York's upper crust, you must attend their charity galas. These are the arenas where fortunes are pledged to save the world with one hand, while the other signs off on gentrification projects that displace thousands. It was in this glittering ecosystem, surrounded by champagne flutes and surgically perfected smiles, that I honed my craft of intelligence gathering. Dressed in an Oscar de la Renta gown and the family's more understated diamonds, I perfected the look of polite indifference that is the ultimate camouflage of America's old money. I became a ghost in plain sight, the kind of person everyone acknowledges, but no one truly sees. "Eleanor, darling, how is your father?" the matriarchs would ask, their eyes betraying that their concern was for his financial, not physical health. All the while, my phone, set to record, would be capturing every indiscreet piece of gossip, every revealing aside, every illicit deal whispered over dry martinis and caviar blinis. Expensive gifts, I learned, are the modern Trojan horse. For Amanda's 38th birthday, I gave her a state-of-the-art digital art frame for her office desk. To keep the family's best memories close, cousin, I said, deploying the most genuine smile I could muster. She was oblivious to the fact that the device housed a powerful microphone connected directly to my surveillance network. Likewise, the high-speed charging brick I accidentally left in Liam's office and the sleek pen holder gifted to his assistant provided me with a constant, unfiltered stream of information. You would be utterly astounded by what people say when they believe no one is listening. It's how I caught Amanda on the phone with her lover, who, by a stunning coincidence, was a senior partner at Vanguard Developments, our main competitor. The new South Bronx redevelopment project is almost a lock, she murmured. If you can get me the final proposal details before the presentation, we can undercut them. Corporate and familial treason, all in one neat package. How efficient of her. Liam's crimes were, by contrast, predictably brutish. I caught him during a power lunch at the Grill, that midtown cathedral of commerce, where a single steak costs more than an average monthly car payment. I was seated strategically behind a planter, forcing down a risotto I couldn't taste, my focus entirely on the James Bond-esque pen camera I'd bought online. He accepted a thick envelope from a contractor, the exchange seamless. The contracts will be approved next week, Liam assured the man, sliding the bribe into the inner pocket of his custom Italian suit. I would later discover this particular contractor was overcharging us by 40% on construction materials, with the difference being funneled directly to my cousin. And all this while my father, weakened by the stroke, placed his unwavering trust in his nephew's natural business acumen. The scene didn't just anger me, it turned my stomach. Not because of the dishonesty, I expected that, but because of the ease with which he betrayed the trust of a man who had treated him like a son. There's a line between being calculating and being cruel. I had crossed my share of moral boundaries on this mission, but I could still sleep at night. I often wondered if my cousin could say the same. My position as chief legal officer was the perfect cover. I had legitimate, unfettered access to nearly every document within the Hayes Empire. Contracts, meeting minutes, financial reports, official communications. It all crossed my desk. It was through this privileged access that I uncovered Liam's network of shell corporations, designed to siphon funds from our family's own projects. I found 3 ghost construction companies registered to straw owners, a doorman, a line cook, and a driver, men who likely had no idea they were corporate tycoons on paper. The contracts appeared legitimate on the surface, but a deeper dive revealed the grossly inflated figures. If you notice any irregularities, you tell me immediately, my father had commanded when he gave me the job. I obeyed, in a sense. I documented everything, but I kept the knowledge for myself. We need to shield ourselves from potential litigation on the Astoria Residences project, I once said in a board meeting, deliberately naming one of the ventures affected by Liam's embezzlement. I saw the flash of panic in his eyes, quickly masked by a forced calm. "Don't you worry, cousin. It's all legally sound," he replied in that smooth, practiced tone he used only when lying. I nodded politely, my mind cataloging the mountain of incriminating evidence already secured in my archive. I learned to set these verbal snares, seemingly innocent comments designed to provoke revealing reactions. As a lawyer, I knew precisely how to build an ironclad case. Every legal recording made in a public space, every document handled with an impeccable chain of custody, every statement notarized and dated. It wasn't enough to know the truth. I had to be able to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. At night, in my secret Soho loft, I would meticulously organize the day's harvest. The walls were a chaotic mural of photos, documents, and transcripts, all connected by color-coded string like something out of a detective film. It looked like an obsession, and perhaps it was, but there was a definitive method to my madness. The evidence was sorted into clear categories: tax fraud, embezzlement, forgery, bribery, influence peddling. On one particularly fruitful evening, I discovered that Amanda and Liam were using a chic art gallery in Chelsea as a money laundering front. They would have the gallery sell wildly overvalued artworks between different Hayes subsidiary companies, generating fictitious profits and slashing their tax liabilities. Every criminal leaves a signature. My old law professor used to drill that into our heads. My cousins weren't just criminals. They were prolific authors, leaving behind an entire library of felonies. And I was their devoted librarian, cataloging every single volume. But patience is the sharpest tool in a hunter's arsenal. You never pull the trigger when the animal is on high alert. You wait until it feels safe, fat, and comfortable in its own territory. Only then do you strike. My father's second stroke was the one that truly broke him. At 72, Arthur Hayes became a ghost, haunting the halls of his own empire, a shadow of the titan he once was. Confined to the mansion, reliant on 24-hour care, and struggling to form a single sentence. That was the signal my cousins had been waiting for. Their circling became a grotesque, impatient dive. It was like watching vultures, convinced the lion was finally dead. "We need to restructure the executive board while Uncle Arthur recovers," Liam announced at a board meeting, his eyes glittering with a poorly concealed ambition. "Temporarily, of course," he added, a pathetic attempt at subtlety that convinced absolutely no one. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, a corporate poker face I had spent years perfecting, while the recorder in my briefcase captured every syllable. My calculated silence was, as I had hoped, mistaken for submission. I visited my father every day. I'd bring him architectural magazines I knew he could no longer focus on and read him the Wall Street Journal's real estate section, updating him on the company he built. Through the cracked open door, I would often see them watching, Liam and Amanda, their impatience a foul odor in the air. I once overheard Amanda on the phone with a friend. "It's unbearable, the way she plays the devoted daughter. How much longer can this possibly go on?" The coldness of it was a physical blow, but I let nothing show. Instead, I had more cameras installed throughout the mansion, focusing on my father's study. My instincts paid off. On a Sunday afternoon, when I had let it be known I was at a wellness retreat in the Berkshires, the cameras caught Liam rifling through my father's desk, photographing documents, desperately hunting for the will. 2 weeks later, I uncovered the full scope of their plan. They had found a crooked notary public willing to validate a forged will. "The old man can barely hold a pen, let alone sign his name," I recorded Liam, telling the man during a meeting at a secluded restaurant in Westchester County, my camera's zoom lens capturing the exchange from the parking lot. "But I have more than enough samples of his signature to create a perfect replica." The notary, a portly man sweating in the air conditioning, looked nervous, but the thick stacks of cash Liam slid across the table seemed to fortify his resolve. That night, I made 3 critical calls. The first was to an assistant district attorney I knew from my Columbia days. The second went to a retired NYPD detective who had done some discreet work for me in the past. The third was to a former executive assistant Amanda had wrongfully fired years ago. I didn't reveal the whole picture to any of them. I simply planted the seeds, knowing they would sprout at precisely the right time. All the while, I kept a live feed of the cameras in my father's room on a dedicated monitor. A dark premonition told me they wouldn't wait for nature to take its course. This chess match was entering its endgame, and I could not afford a single mistake. My father's final months were an exercise in slow agony, like watching a great redwood fall in agonizingly slow motion. Trapped in the master suite overlooking gardens he could no longer walk, Arthur Hayes faded while the empire he built was being carved up around him. I divided my life between the boardroom, where I maintained a facade of corporate normalcy, and his bedside, where I read him chapters from The Great Gatsby, a book he loved. "I want my daughter here," he would manage to say on his clearer days, earning me venomous looks from Liam and Amanda, who only ever appeared for carefully timed visits when they knew a key board member would also be present. "Dearest uncle, I brought you those special almond cookies from that little shop in Soho," Amanda would coo, a sickeningly theatrical performance for a man who could barely swallow broth. The cynicism was nauseating, but I just smiled and played my part. One afternoon, I came home from the office earlier than expected and found Amanda in his room alone. I paused at the door, instinct taking over, and watched through the narrow gap. She was fumbling in his nightstand drawer while trying to press a pen into my father's limp hand, a document laid out before him. "It's just a formality, Uncle, to make sure the business keeps running smoothly while you rest," she whispered in a honey-sweet voice. A power of attorney, of course. My father, heavily sedated, could barely keep his eyes open. I swept into the room, feigning surprise. "Amanda, I didn't know you were stopping by." Her startled jump was almost comical as she shoved the paper into her Chanel handbag, her face rearranging itself into a tight, artificial smile. "Just checking in on my favorite uncle," she chirped. After she left, a quick check of his medication chart confirmed it. Someone had doubled his sedative dosage. That night, the entire nursing staff was replaced with a team of professionals who reported directly and only to me. The recordings from the following weeks confirmed my darkest fears. Liam arranged a secret meeting with Dr. Miller, our family's physician of 30 years. My bug, planted under their table at a high-end sushi restaurant, thanks to a generous tip to the maitre d', caught the entire conversation. "Realistically, doctor, how much time does he have?" Liam asked between sips of sake. "It's hard to say. With the current level of care, maybe 6 months, perhaps a year," the doctor replied uneasily. Liam's sigh was thick with impatience. And what if that care were less intensive? The silence that followed was louder than any confession. I didn't wait another second. That very night, I hired a second neurologist under the guise of seeking another opinion on Dad's treatment. What my cousins didn't know was that this new doctor was also a forensic medical expert, under my explicit instruction to meticulously document any sign of deliberate medical neglect. The battle for the Hayes Empire had now become a battle for my father's life, and I would not yield a single inch. If that meant turning our home into a fortress of surveillance, a minefield of hidden microphones and cameras, then so be it. My father's funeral at St. Thomas Church felt less like a farewell and more like the year's most exclusive networking event. The titans of New York's real estate and finance industries glided through the pews in their bespoke dark suits, exchanging hushed condolences that sounded more like stock tips. "An irreplaceable loss for the market," they'd murmur, as if my father's entire existence could be condensed into a stock ticker symbol. I stood tall, accepting their empty words with the steely composure he had always demanded of me, all while watching my cousins work the room like hosts at a macabre cocktail party. Amanda, shielded behind oversized Gucci sunglasses that failed to hide her bone-dry eyes, was deep in conversation with a city council member. Liam, who only ever ventured near the casket when a photographer from a society column was nearby, was already on his phone, audibly discussing the sale of a new condo development in Hudson Yards. The body wasn't even cold, and yet the vultures were already feasting. "Look at this turnout," my Aunt Elisa, their mother, remarked, adjusting a string of black pearls as if posing for a magazine spread. "Your father would have been so proud." I gave a slight nod, swallowing the acid that rose in my throat. She had never forgiven my father for marrying my mother, the secretary who had stolen the great Arthur Hayes from the appropriate circle of old money debutantes. Years of her venomous asides. I do pity the girl, growing up without the proper references. Teresa was a sweet thing, but she lacked the proper breeding, had taught me that a calculated silence is the most powerful response. As she prattled on about the urgent need to reorganize the business, my mind was running a diagnostic, mentally checking off the number of active recording devices capturing every handshake and treacherous whisper of my dear family. Technology is a marvelous ally when you know how to wield it. The official reading of the will was scheduled for the following week, but I didn't have to wait that long. During the post-funeral reception at the mansion, I picked up the signals I was waiting for. In a secluded corner, I watched Liam speaking with a lawyer I didn't recognize. "The document is impeccable," he said. "No one will question its authenticity." Later, in the garden, Amanda was on her phone, her voice low but not low enough to evade the directional microphone I was aiming from a nearby window. "We did it," she breathed. "She doesn't suspect a thing. The signature is perfect." A cold, thin smile touched my lips as I turned to accept another mechanical hug from one of my father's business partners. My poor, clever cousins, so lost in their own little plot, so blind to the one that was about to consume them. When Mr. Davies, the family's longtime attorney, pulled me aside with a look of feigned compassion and warned that there might be some surprises in the will and that I should be prepared, I simply thanked him for his concern. He had no idea I was holding a notarized copy of the real will, the one my father and I had executed 2 years ago, which named me as the primary heir and executor of his estate. Any other document was nothing more than a forgery, and the centerpiece of the trap I was about to spring. The secret meeting took place at a discreet law firm in a midtown skyscraper. The firm had a reputation for making problems disappear for the right price. I was not invited, of course, but that small detail didn't prevent me from attending. The listening device I'd planted in Liam's briefcase, a tiny marvel of modern espionage, worked flawlessly, broadcasting every word directly to my Soho loft, where I spent the night transcribing their conspiracy. "We need to get rid of her for good," Liam's voice hissed, dripping with the poison he usually kept hidden. "We have the new will, but she'll fight it." Amanda's voice was sharp with fear. "That little snake was always Daddy's favorite. What if he left her a letter or a recording?" Their paranoia, even filtered through a speaker, was a perverse kind of music to my ears. The plan they hatched was as ingenious as it was predictable. They would produce a set of forged documents proving I had embezzled millions from the company into personal offshore accounts, with dates carefully manipulated to suggest I had been abusing my father's trust for years. "Are you sure the evidence is convincing?" Amanda asked. The lawyer's reply was slick with overconfidence. "The fabricated wire transfers, the faked invoices, it's all meticulously prepared. Your cousin won't just be disinherited, she'll be facing federal fraud charges." They went on to discuss the costs, how much to bribe certain auditors, the fee for the forensic accountant who would swear to the document's authenticity. I recorded every second of it. That night, I made 3 separate encrypted backups of my entire 7-year archive, storing them in different physical and cloud locations. Was it paranoia? Perhaps, but paranoia is just another word for preparation when your enemies are real. With their plot taking shape, I made a quiet visit to David Chen, an assistant district attorney I knew from Columbia. We weren't friends. Friendship is a luxury I had long since discarded, but there was a mutual respect for each other's competence. We met at a dimly lit old-school bar in the East Village, far from the prying eyes of the Upper East Side. "I need your professional opinion on a hypothetical case," I began. I laid out the situation in broad, abstract terms. His sharp eyes lit up with professional curiosity. "This hypothetical case," he said, making air quotes. "Does it have concrete proof?" I nodded. "Substantial." He took a thoughtful sip of his beer. "If your evidence was legally obtained and is admissible in court, your hypothetical case is a slam dunk." I didn't tell him everything, of course. David was a useful contact, but the line between an asset and a liability is razor thin when the stakes are this high. As I got up to leave, he gently touched my arm. "Eleanor, be careful. I've seen cases like this end badly for everyone involved." I smiled, thanked him for the advice, and walked out into the cold night air, thinking to myself, not for the one who has been preparing for 7 years. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to spring it. In the theater of justice, the actors never realize the script has been rewritten until the final scene. The emergency shareholders meeting was called for a grim Monday morning, the kind of New York day where a cold drizzle clings to the glass towers of Midtown, seeming to mirror the city's darkest intentions. Inside the Hayes Properties headquarters, the auditorium was a sea of dark suits and nervous energy. The polished mahogany and Italian leather held the city's financial elite. Minority partners, institutional investors, board members, all waiting to see who would seize the crown of my father's empire. I made my entrance precisely 10 minutes before the start, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit from the Row, a color my father always called the uniform of quiet power. A wave of whispers followed me down the central aisle as I walked. They were all expecting to see the grieving daughter, the broken heiress about to be publicly humiliated. I offered a few polite smiles, letting their underestimation of me be my shield. "Eleanor, so glad you could make it," Liam said, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. He gestured toward a chair in the back row, far from the head table where he and Amanda had already positioned themselves like monarchs. "Thank you, cousin. But I prefer my usual seat," I replied coolly, gliding to my place in the front row, the one I had always occupied next to my father. His discomfort was a small, satisfying victory. From the corner of my eye, I saw my assets in place. David Chen, the assistant U.S. attorney, sat with two men in unassuming suits who I knew to be U.S. Marshals. As planned, they had arrived precisely at 10 a.m. Under the table, my thumb typed a single word and hit send. Now. Seconds later, 3 journalists from the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg slipped in, taking strategic seats, a courtesy of an anonymous tip about a major corporate scandal about to break. At 10:15, Liam began, his voice booming with a confidence he did not own. Following the tragic loss of our beloved Arthur, it is imperative that we restructure the leadership of Hayes Properties for a stable future. Beside him, Amanda nodded, her expression a masterclass in performative grief. Mr. Davies, the family attorney, then rose, a black leather portfolio in his hands. I have here Mr. Hayes's most recent last will and testament, properly filed and executed, he announced, clearing his throat and shooting me a look of what might have been pity. Due to the discovery of certain administrative and financial irregularities, Mr. Hayes saw fit to make significant changes to the distribution of his assets. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. The show was beginning exactly as my cousins had rehearsed. But this wasn't their play. It was the closing night of a production I had been directing for 7 years. Before we proceed with the reading, I said, my voice cutting through the tension as I rose to my feet, I have a few documents of my own that are material to this meeting. The silence that fell was thick and heavy. Liam's brow furrowed, his confusion quickly souring into irritation. Eleanor, we are on a schedule. Whatever you have can wait. I allowed myself a real smile then, not the polite one I usually wore, but the sharp, predatory grin my father reserved for closing a billion-dollar deal. I'm afraid it can't, cousin. In fact, these documents render this entire meeting irrelevant. On cue, the auditorium doors swung open. 5 FBI agents, led by a woman with a face carved from granite, strode in. The effect was electric. Executives sat bolt upright. Anxious glances were exchanged across the room. Amanda's face went white as a sheet. "What is the meaning of this?" Liam demanded, his voice cracking. The lead agent didn't flinch, holding up her badge as she marched toward the stage. "Liam and Amanda Hayes, we have a federal warrant for the seizure of all documents related to an ongoing investigation into forgery, wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering." The U.S. Marshals in the back stood, approaching the stage with their own papers. "And we have a temporary restraining order, effective immediately, freezing any and all transfer of assets or shares pending the outcome of this investigation." Chaos erupted. Amanda, ever the picture of composure, knocked over a glass of water, soaking the fraudulent will. Liam made a desperate lunge for his phone, no doubt to wipe it clean, but was intercepted by an agent. Mr. Davies looked as if he had aged a decade in a single second. The journalists were no longer discreet, their cameras and recorders capturing every moment. I walked calmly to the head table and placed my own leather-bound portfolio before the lead agent. "You'll find everything you need in here," I said. "Legally obtained recordings, a comparative analysis of original versus forged documents, bank statements tracing every stolen dollar, sworn affidavits, and, of course, my father's true and valid will, notarized and filed with the county clerk 2 years ago." Liam's expression collapsed, shifting from shock to pure fury, and then to something I had never seen on his face before, raw, unadulterated fear. "You treacherous bitch!" Amanda shrieked, her mask of sophistication shattering as she lunged at me, her manicured nails poised to strike. An agent swiftly restrained her. "Agent, please add attempted assault to the list of charges," I noted calmly, straightening the lapel of my blazer. I then turned to the stunned audience. "Shareholders, my apologies for the drama, but believe me, the performance you were about to witness would have been far more damaging to this company." I gestured to the evidence the agents were now securing. "For 7 years, I have systematically documented every crime my cousins have committed against this company, against my father, and by extension, against all of you. Embezzlement exceeding $40 million, fraudulent contracts, tax evasion, bribery of public officials. The list is quite extensive." A gasp went through the auditorium. The Hayes Empire, that untouchable symbol of New York power, was built on a rotten foundation. And I, the underestimated outsider, was the one holding the hammer, ready to bring it all crashing down. The unraveling of Amanda Hayes was a sight to behold, the kind of raw, public implosion that tabloid photographers dream of capturing. As cuffs snapped onto her wrists, Amanda began to scream, her perfectly constructed facade crumbling into a spectacle of frantic self-preservation. It was him. It was all Liam's idea. I was just following his lead. Betrayal. Arriving right on schedule. It was so predictable, I almost felt a flicker of pity for him. Almost. Liam, for his part, tried to cling to his dignity, but a sheen of sweat on his forehead betrayed him as an agent began swiping through his confiscated phone. "Hey, you can't do that without a specific warrant for the device," he protested, his voice weak. The lead FBI agent simply held up the document. "The warrant covers all electronic devices, Mr. Hayes. Your recent search history is illuminating." Apparently, in the last 24 hours, Liam had Googled how to permanently wipe an iPhone and countries with no extradition treaty with the U.S. The sheer stupidity of the arrogant is a constant source of amazement. But the final devastating blow came when the agent, after a brief word with her team, made a chilling announcement. "We also have evidence that suggests the suspect's potential involvement in the death of Mr. Arthur Hayes." A silence so profound it felt like a physical weight fell upon the room. Until that moment, this had been about money. Now, it was about something far darker. I nodded to the agent, who then played the audio file. It was from 3 weeks before my father's death, a recording of Liam talking to the new night nurse. "He's lived long enough." Liam's unmistakable voice echoed through the auditorium speakers. "An extra dose of the sedative at night. Who's going to question it? Terminally ill patients have accidents all the time." Expressions of pure horror bloomed on the faces of the shareholders. These men, who moments ago might have seen my cousins as ruthless but respectable heirs, now saw them for what they were: monsters. As the agents led them away, I spoke directly to them for the first time, my voice not triumphant, but as cold and sterile as a surgeon's scalpel. "For 7 years you underestimated me. That was your fatal error. While you were scheming to write me out of my father's will, I was writing a detailed account of every crime, every fraud, every betrayal. You called me a bastard behind my back, questioned my right to the Hayes name, all while you were bleeding the company my father built dry." The journalists scribbled furiously, their headlines already taking shape. The board members stared, their entire understanding of the predator and the prey in this family drama being violently reconfigured. Mr. Davies, the family lawyer, looked like a ghost, his face a mask of shame and defeat. Once they were gone and the chaos began to subside, I addressed the room. "I suggest we adjourn this meeting until the legal matters are settled. Hayes Properties will continue to operate under my interim leadership, as stipulated in my father's legitimate will." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a coronation. And not a single person in that room dared to object. The trial of my cousins became the biggest spectacle in New York high society for a generation. The Daniel Patrick Moynihan U.S. Courthouse in Manhattan had never seen such a daily procession of black cars and town cars, as the city's elite turned out to watch the public execution of what the papers had dubbed the Royals of Real Estate. I sat in the front row every day, a silent observer in impeccably tailored suits, watching a film whose every line I already knew by heart. Former employees, fired for asking the wrong questions, took the stand. Accountants, ordered to cook the books, presented their evidence. Each testimony added another layer to the case I had already built. The defendant, Amanda Hayes, explicitly instructed me to falsify the revenue projections for the Astoria Residences project, a former CFO stated, looking directly at my cousin, who seemed to shrink in the defendant's chair. Liam tried to maintain his air of invincibility, but the mask crumbled when the prosecution displayed the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands on a large screen for the jury. "I do not recognize those transactions," he said, his voice trembling. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp, unsmiling woman who had taken the case after David Chen recused himself, offered a cold smile. "That's curious, Mr. Hayes, because the biometric signature authorizing every single transfer is a perfect match to yours. Technology is a fascinating thing, isn't it?" The final nail in the coffin was the testimony from the chief medical examiner. The court had ordered my father's body to be exhumed. We found abnormally high levels of benzodiazepines in his system, the ME explained to the jury. The concentration was not consistent with his prescribed medical treatment, but with a deliberate fatal overdose. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Financial fraud was one thing. Murdering your own uncle was another. Amanda completely fell apart, sobbing uncontrollably, but her tears were for herself, not for my father. It was Liam. He manipulated the medicine. I knew something was wrong, but I never thought he'd go that far. Her desperate attempt to throw her brother under the bus only sealed both of their fates. The night nurse, granted immunity for his testimony, confessed on the stand that Liam had paid him $50,000 to not pay too close attention. As the court absorbed the sheer evil of it all, I remained motionless. I had won, but the victory tasted more like ash than champagne. With my cousins convicted, Liam sentenced to 25 years to life for second-degree murder and a litany of financial crimes, Amanda receiving 18 years as an accomplice. Full control of Hayes' properties reverted to me. The first board meeting I presided over as CEO was on a bright September morning, exactly 9 months after my father's death. It was the same room, the same leather chairs, but the atmosphere had been fundamentally altered. The board members, once so deferential to my cousins, now looked at me with a potent mixture of fear and profound respect. "Gentlemen," I announced, my voice cutting through the tense silence of the boardroom as my team distributed the portfolios. "As of today, we are implementing a new charter of corporate governance." The men around the polished mahogany table shifted uncomfortably. Full transparency, a fully independent external audit committee, and a zero-tolerance direct to the CEO whistleblower channel. One of the oldest board members, a man named Caldwell, who had been my father's contemporary, cleared his throat. "Ms. Hayes, with all due respect, some of our traditional ways of doing business might be complicated by this level of transparency." I met his gaze and held it, letting a slow, cold smile form. "That is precisely the point, Mr. Caldwell. The traditional ways, as you so delicately put it, cost this company over $40 million, and 2 members of my family are currently in federal prison. I think it's time we started some new traditions." The message landed with the force of a gavel. The era of backroom deals and creative accounting was over. In the weeks that followed, I made it my mission to dismantle the culture of fear and secrecy. I instituted an open-door policy, a 15-minute pitch session that any employee, from the mailroom to the executive suite, could book with me. At first, there was skepticism. Why would the billionaire heiress listen to a janitor? But I kept my word. I learned about inefficient lighting systems from that janitor, a marketing idea from a junior analyst, and a potential logistics breakthrough from a delivery driver. Slowly, the ice began to thaw. One rainy afternoon, I drove myself out to Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. The Hayes family mausoleum, a grand statement of Italian marble and sculpted angels, had always struck me as gaudy. But now, it felt like a monument to a bygone era of corrupt power. I placed a bouquet of white lilies, my father's favorite, on his tomb. "I did it, Dad," I whispered into the silence. "I got justice for you." An unexpected knot formed in my throat. For 7 years, my entire existence had been defined by a single, all-consuming mission. Now that it was over, a terrifying question echoed in the void. What now? Who was Eleanor Hayes when she wasn't at war? I had spent so much energy destroying my enemies that I had never drafted a blueprint for what came after. Driving back to Manhattan, I realized that while the victory was absolute, it hadn't brought the peace I had secretly craved. I had won everything, only to feel profoundly empty. The empire was mine, but the cost had been 7 years of my life, marinated in vengeance. The media was relentless. The Iron Heiress, the corporate avenger, the vengeful princess. The sensationalist nicknames were plastered across magazine covers and news sites. I refused every interview request, focusing all my energy on stabilizing the company. "They want to turn your life into an HBO drama," David Chen remarked during one of his occasional visits. Our relationship had shifted from a strategic alliance to something approaching friendship. a concept that still felt foreign to me. "Let them talk," I replied, not looking up from the documents I was signing. "I have a company to run." But the truth was, their narrative was beginning to chafe. It felt as if the world had frozen me in that single moment of triumph, ignoring the woman who existed before the war and the one who had to figure out how to live after it. The realization hit me one morning on the terrace of the mansion, a vast, lonely space I now occupied alone. I couldn't remember the last time I had truly laughed. Not a polite social laugh or a strategic business laugh, but a real, spontaneous, from-the-gut laugh. 7 years of living as a double agent in my own life had taken their toll. "You need a hobby, Miss Hayes," said Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper who had been with the family since I was a child. She was one of the few people who still saw the girl, not the CEO. "All you do is work. Your father was the same, you know. And look where it got him, rich, powerful, and all alone." Her blunt words struck me harder than any consultant's report. Was that my destiny? To build an even greater empire, only to die alone in it? The change didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, deliberate process of reclaiming my own life. I started by delegating real authority, hiring brilliant executives, and then actually trusting them, a revolutionary act for me. I established the Hayes Foundation, funding STEM education for underprivileged girls in the outer boroughs, not as a PR stunt, but with rigorous metrics for success. Most importantly, I began to reconnect with the Eleanor who had been buried under 7 years of rage. I started taking ballet classes again, a passion I'd abandoned as a teenager. I traveled not for business, but for the simple joy of seeing something new. It was on one of those trips in Lisbon that I ran into Ethan, an old classmate from Columbia Law. He'd left the corporate world to become a chef and now owned a small, brilliant restaurant. What started as a casual reunion dinner turned into nights of honest conversation and, for the first time in nearly a decade, genuine laughter. "They stole 7 years of my past," I told him one night, looking up at the stars from the balcony of the apartment I'd rented. "But they will not lay a hand on my future."